Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Henry. I am a third year computer engineering student, and I'm presenting my final project for co-op community engineering course. I chose to read the book The Cathedral and the Bazaar, Musings on Linux and Open Source by an Accidental Revolutionary. It's by Eric S. Raymond, who was a man who was very influential in getting the free and open source community involved in everything with open source and having it become more mainstream. So to begin with, I use Microsoft Windows. I'm just going to exit out some of these things. Microsoft and Windows, they just try to help you out by starting up some programs that they think that you might use. That way, it just saves you the time from having to double click everything. So I can just close this out. Um, Here's a little thing right here. I don't need it. It's just Microsoft OneDrive. You can pay them to keep some of your keep some of your files on their computer, and it just helps everyone out just to give all your files to Microsoft and everything. Here's a little pop up. Omen, HP Omen. It played a little bell, and HP, they're a pretty cool company, and they just wanted to give me some of their proprietary software and install it on my laptop just so I get the maximum gaming potential of my laptop because like they really care about my system and my choices. But I don't need that. Maybe later. I'm just going to open up my Microsoft PowerPoint that I made. PowerPoint's really awesome. It works really well with Windows. It's made by Microsoft and everything. It's really easy to use. So I'll just open it up from this Windows button. Yeah, and like it's pretty cool how they do this. They're trying to sell me an Xbox. It's like a cool console companion. Like me and my computer, my Xbox can be friends, and like when we're playing games. And especially now during COVID and everything, it's really great to use like software like Skype, which is owned by Microsoft, just to communicate with friends and everything like that. And yeah, I use my machine to do work, but also there's some free time and stuff. Like that's why it's great that like Microsoft can ask me if I want to play Minecraft right here on my screen here, because Microsoft knew that Minecraft was such a good game that they decided to buy it for themselves, and that's why they're asking me to play it. And after they struck a deal with King with their Candy Crush Saga, uh, Bill Gates just liked Candy Crush so much that like he's just looking out for me and wondering if I want to possibly use it, and that's pretty cool. Uh, and also, the internet, dangerous place, viruses everywhere. They can get in and use have me type in my Windows administrator password. So it's pretty nice that they are recommending for me to use McAfee antivirus. John McAfee, pretty trustworthy guy, and cares about like the security of my system and all. So here I'll just open up PowerPoint here. Oh, I might not have it in. Here we go, Microsoft PowerPoint right here. And some people they might think, well, just use Linux. It's free. It does everything that Windows can do. Its source is available so everyone can tell if there's any issues or spying going on, and any bugs can be fixed by anyone who can find one. But really, I mean, Linux is free, so what value could that even have to me if it's free? I mean, I'm happy that my laptop was sold to me, including the price of Windows with no choice, because I mean, Windows costs money, it has to be better. And obviously, there's stuff of how Microsoft's CEO claims that Linux is a cancer and that they're hippies and communists, and it attaches itself to everything that it touches. And that's pretty surprising, considering that worldwide server operating systems in 2017, 68% use Linux, and that number is still growing. So obviously, the entire internet must have some kind of issue, as for some reason people are using Linux more than Windows.
All right, so now I'm booted into Linux Mint. You can see the logo right here. I have my computer dual booted, so I have both Windows and Linux Mint installed. Sometimes I go back and forth. I've used different distros as well, like Debian, Ubuntu. For a few years in high school, I only had Linux installed on my computer, but it's always a good idea to dual boot so you can choose. Over on this side of the screen, I have some of the takeaways that I got from reading the book, The Cathedral and The Bazaar, and I think I'm just going to walk through some. The first one is providing source code allows the community to audit the code. Over here, you can see we have the source code for Gimp, which is a free and open source Photoshop replacement. I use it all the time. I do some pretty advanced stuff with it, and if you're used to using Photoshop, you should feel right at home. Here's the menus.c. It's in some of the folders on their GitLab. We can see all the code. We can see some of the menus where the file, context, debug, these would all be up in the menu bar. And being able to look through all the code like this allows you to make sure that there's nothing that could possibly collect data on you or do anything that you wouldn't want to do, such as like a hidden Bitcoin miner or something like that. You can install Gimp just as a regular file if you want, or if you want to, you can actually install directly from source so you know nothing is going to be going into it. The second big point that I took out of the book was every good work of software starts by scratching a developer's personal itch. I think this is pretty interesting because it shows off the difference between open source software, which is a lot of times developed by people who have the need and have the passion, as opposed to some proprietary software that is just created by some guy who's trying to make money working a job. And not that that doesn't create effective software, but you might be able to get a little bit nicer and possibly more thought put into something that someone's actually a developer's personal itch. A good example, here's the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and there's definitely a personal itch here to create something good and something exciting and something worthwhile, as opposed to this is a photo of my ceiling in my bedroom right now. There's this crack here, but it's just white. They didn't do a great job. There's some bumps. Maybe they could have sanded down if they cared, but they were just doing it to get the paycheck, so I understand that. Here's the third point. Good programmers know what to write. Great ones know what to rewrite and reuse. Now, this is pretty interesting. I'm going to continue using GIMP as an example. Here's the dependencies that GIMP uses. So you can see that it uses Cairo, which is a 2D graphics library, Pango, which is a rendering text library, MyPaint that has brushes, and you can customize brushes. They use a lot of these things. They're different libraries. They're working with different files, and all the source code for GIMP, instead of recreating all of these things, which they could have, and that might be something that a proprietary software company would do, they instead chose to leverage existing softwares and technologies, because that way they don't have to worry about reinventing the wheel. They also don't have to worry about needing to do better than what these projects do. And also, like, for example, libpng is maintained by a lot of people that know a lot about PNG image files, and they can always stay up to date and make sure there's no bugs, and you can have another team working on that. So that's a really great point, and you often see in open source software that it does leverage a lot of other dependencies that are oftentimes also open source. A lot of times you'll see the term GNU, and that refers to the GNU public license, which basically, the GNU General Public License, which basically says who can use it and what you can use it for, and it's very generous license, and most of the time you can use the code in your projects. Here's another great point. Treating your users as co-developers is your least hassle route to rapid code improvement and effective debugging. Now, what this basically means is that instead of hiring a huge QA team to try to throw arbitrary tests at it, you can instead have an issue page where users themselves have issues saying, for example, this one was 2 days ago, crash opening typography floating window. He can describe the reproduction. Is this bug reproducible? Always. And explains how that is. And this issue is there for other developers. They can come in and try to fix this. Gimp is filled with issues, as with all open source software. And you can even go to the closed ones that where you can see where there was a fix. So we can click on this. They're missing a dialog in the GIF and PNG export on Mac OS. You can come down here, thanks to the report. And then eventually there was a code fix from this merge request. And we can see the actual code. Here's the code. They just added this and that fixed the bug. That's a great example of using your users as co-developers. And instead of having to have developers take all the time to test on every single system and every single use case, just by having the users report and having a good system allows to have efficient and bug-free software. This is another great point. Release early, release often, and listen to your customers. You'll hear the term release early and release often in open source software quite frequently. Basically, there's no reason to hold off the code and features through some kind of large release that's going to be celebrated. Instead, here's an example of some of the GIMP tags. These are tags 1 month ago, 2 months ago, 5 months ago. You can see it's pretty frequently, and they use semantic versioning here. But you can also go to the commits, and you can see commits of 1 day ago, 5 days ago, 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago. So you can always get the most up-to-date software out to the users, which has even smaller time in between bugs, and also they can be tested as soon as possible. A lot of times, open source software, including Linux kernels and almost all other software, will have different types of versioning. There'll be stable, there'll be nightly builds, there'll be pre-patch or RC builds. So depending on what type of end user, some end user might want to go with more heavily tested code that is not likely to crash, when other users would like to have the most up-to-date features but not mind if there's a crash because they're going to be reporting the issue at any time anyway. Here's a good example of some of the releases for the Linux kernel. You can see 7 hours ago, 8 hours ago, 3 days ago, 6 days ago, and they're all versioned and tagged. And you can see Greg Hartman and Linus Torvalds, they're two high up maintainers of the Linux project, and you'll see their names around often. So you can just download these kernels and then put them back in your distro and you're good to go. This one, I added this as the last one. I think that sometimes people see this as a personal choice, when personally I see this as something very important to free and open source software. It's perfection in design is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but rather when there's nothing more to take away. I think you can, that's interesting because nowadays with the new iPhones, we see the need of more cameras and more features and more apps that come installed on your screen. And as you could see with the little bit of the sarcastic opening that I had talking about Windows, there's programs, features, ads, suggestions, personal assistance, all included in your operating system, when that's not something that you really ask for. A lot better way to do it would be to give the bare minimum to a point where there's nothing more to take away, then allow the users to install what they want. That means less bloat, less possibility for bugs, less possibilities for security exploits, as well as just having a more customizable system for the user. A great example would be TinyCore Linux. It is a small Linux distro that fits into 12 megabytes with a graphical user interface, and it is about as small as you can get for a Linux install with a graphical user interface. You can see you can run Firefox, but essentially every tool that is not needed was removed, and all unnecessary code was removed, leaving you with a system that there's nothing more that you can take away, meaning that you have the full possibility of adding any features you want. It'll run very efficiently on older hardware because you don't have all this bloat and services running. And while TinyCore Linux might not be something that's for everybody, a great alternative for another lightweight distro could be something like Lubuntu or lightweight Ubuntu that is stripped away. It runs on a low system specs, and there's not any bloat. There's no unnecessary software, pop-ups, suggestions, advertisements, anything like that. I think with these with these six main takeaways, there's plenty more to be learned from the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, but I think these were the most relevant to computer engineers and software engineers. So I hope that you enjoyed my presentation.